Hello, good morning, everybody. I'm so excited. I'm very honored to be here. So I heard that this session is kind of a first session of the Sushi Tech event today. So let's do like a kickstart today. So we're gonna have like a very, very interesting panels. I'm very honored to host with such a wonderful panelist. So before starting the discussion, I'm gonna make a quick introduction of the wonderful panelists, the super panelists. So the first of all, we're gonna have Maija Itkonen. So she's a serial entrepreneur from Finland. She has built a couple of the company, exited 2 tech companies, and then now she is a co-founder and the CEO of the Onego Bio. So the food biotech companies developing the alternative egg protein, the so-called bioalbumin, through the precision fermentation. So Onego has just raised $40 million around through the Series A the last month. This is one of the largest, the Series A round in the Nordics. So welcome to the Maija.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we have the Masahiro Ito. Maybe let me call you the Masa. So he's also the serial entrepreneur from Japan, and he built the first company when you were 70 years old.
That's right.
And since then you have been the entrepreneurs, truly entrepreneurs. So now he's the CEO and the co-founders of the PowerX, which is revolutionizing the renewable energy sectors and also the battery storage industries. And then the PowerX is the most promising climate tech company in Asia, in Japan. So welcome to Masa.
Thank you very much.
And last but not least, we have Susanna Campbell. Thank you for joining. The early morning, the Stockholm. So she is investors, entrepreneurs, and founders and board members. And she is serving the couple of board of directors of the very high-scale climate tech company in the Scandinavians, like Northvolt, H2 Green Steel, and also she is a senior advisor to the Northcam, which is one of the leading impact fund in the Europe. So welcome to the Susanna.
Thank you so much.
Great. What time is it now in Sweden? It's
Way too early. It's 4 a.m. in the morning.
4 a.m. All right. It's pretty bad for you, but thank you for joining such a early time. All right. So would it be okay? Can you explain a little bit about what you are doing with your company? Maybe, yeah, Maija.
Yes, absolutely. Great to be here. Thanks for having us. My company, Onego Bio, is a food biotech company that is specialized in making bioidentical egg protein without using any chickens. So it's really the real ovalbumin protein, and not any alternative or substitute, but the real thing. It is produced in bioreactors, so that we have a certain fungal technology that is able to produce the real ovalbumin protein. And the reason why this is so important is that this animal protein industry has a very high environmental footprint, but at the same time, the egg industry is very much suffering from this avian flus, salmonellas, these cage bans that are very common around the world at the moment. So an ingredient that is a stable ingredient, can be produced totally without the animals and works as a drop-in replacement, is a very interesting ingredient to the food industry.
Okay.
Yes, and we were founded 2 years ago as a spin-off from a research institute. We've got to date about 60 million in funding, in grants, and also in a VC funding.
Great, nice. Thank you, Maija. Then Masa, PowerX.
Yeah, so hi everybody, I'm Masa from PowerX. PowerX is an energy storage company. So we make grid scale batteries, so 20-foot containers, large cubicles, and also fast EV chargers. And we do all fabrication in Japan. So we design, engineer, manufacture, ship and deploy green batteries for renewable energy adoption. So when you look at the Japanese grid, 70% of the grid is from oil, gas, and coal, basically. And so Japan's CO2, 40% of Japan's CO2 is derived from its electricity.
Right.
And so to do more solar, to do more wind, to do more renewables, you need to be able to store that energy cheap. And we have a vertically integrated business model where we own our own factories and we do our own manufacturing for infrastructure here in Japan.
Okay, interesting. That's why the Japan needs your solutions, definitely.
Yeah, we're a local company here.
Okay, all right. Sanna, I know that you were wearing a lot of hats, but it's really hard for you to choose one company. But tell me a little bit about like Northvolt and H2 Green Steel to the Japanese audience.
Happy to do that. Northvolt is a Stockholm, Sweden-based scale-up within green batteries. So it's also a fully integrated company, and we manufacture batteries mainly for electric vehicles. The first gigafactory is located up in northern Sweden, and it's the world's greenest batteries is the target for us, given that there's a lot of green energy in Sweden, and especially in the north of Sweden. We've raised $13 billion to date for that journey, and are also building factories in Germany and in Canada. The second company, H2 Green Steel, we are building basically aiming to produce green steel using green energy to go into the process. That is also being built a big steel mill for 5 million tons per year, being built in northern Sweden. And I'd like to also introduce the Syre, my latest launched company, where we aim to produce textile recycled polyester globally for fashion and apparel and the automotive industry, because polyester is a very CO2 intense textile today.
Okay, wow. Did you hear that? I mean, the Northvolt has raised $13 billion US dollars. It's not a million, the billions. So it's really hard to imagine like under these circumstances, but well done, fantastic. So my first question to all the panelists that given the situation that all the big corporates through the CBC, they are so active in this field. They want to make an investment, they want to make a strategic partnership with a ClimateTech startup, but at the same time, they have a lot of a challenge between the startup and also the big corporate. So how do you see, what would you say that what kind of like advice do you need to give to the founders and corporates, how to make a co-creation of the value between the startup and also the big corporate in this field, I mean ClimateTech field? Maybe can you start with Sanna?
Yes, happy to start. I must say, in all the mentioned companies, we have very close cooperation with some of the largest companies. Looking at Northvolt, some of our earliest investors were companies like ABB, Siemens, Scania, and so on. And I think the key to success for us, because we had some very positive experiences from that, is that you understand what is the actual target for that, what is the reason that corporate is investing in you, and what do they want to achieve, and then that you actually work together to achieve that. I would say operationally, it's also very important to keep a arm's length with to that corporate, because as we know, the pace that these kind of companies move at, the startup versus the large corporate, are normally quite different. What we have worked with a lot is also to make sure that these things are anchored in the top management of the company as well, to make this a strategic cooperation. So that it's not only at lower levels of the organization, but also that the top team are very aware of and engaged in what is going on. But that said, we've had, again, if you really want to achieve true change for a whole industry and for a company, we have very positive experiences with working with these large corporates.
Yeah, okay, definitely. Maija?
Yeah, I would also continue the same lines, that you really have to be solving a real problem. So it might be that the corporate has a big challenge on something with the existing supply, or that otherwise they see that they would be like a premium customer for something like that. So that's absolutely a great starting point. But at the same time, if the starting point is that the corporate just wants to look cool, to follow like trend, or to look more green, to make a nice press release, that like we're so advantaged that advantageous that we are investing in this kind of companies. I don't see that that's a good starting point.
Yeah.
So it can actually go very much wrong, that the startup is expecting much higher resources, much longer commitment, and the other one was just kind of like making one lottery ticket, and that was it.
Yeah,
so
makes
it's
sense.
absolutely not like a totally
Right.
complicated. So there are like these different pitfalls.
What's your opinion on Masa, on that?
Yeah, so our investors are predominantly corporate. So if you go to our website, you'll see that they're all big Japanese companies. And I think what's most important is motive, why they're investing. So I was a board member and I used to run a large company, $10 billion company called Zozo. And from my experience, when a big company invests, they either want a couple of things. Number one, maybe they just want information. They're interested in the field, but they just kind of want to test the waters. These tend to be CVC, smaller investments, and doesn't necessarily help the startup. Sometimes they're really interested in the field, but they don't want to put the 20 billion yen themselves. And so it's risk money, and they're only comfortable with giving out a certain amount of risk money. We were definitely the latter. So our investors are indeed interested in batteries and green tech here, but they don't want to do everything themselves, and they're not quite ready to do that, but they actually want the product. So they all wanted the products that we were making, and so that synergy was very strong for us, and it worked out very well. But I do agree with Susanna in that we do have to have an arm's length, because sometimes when the motives aren't exactly right, it's not a beneficial relationship.
Yeah, well, I don't want to shake the board, but because so many participants were coming from the big corporate as well. So, but again, the purpose of the collaboration from the corporate side is quite big, right? Some people wanted to make an investment just to have an access to the technology or information rights, but any tips from your point of view that how to make a alignment of the interest between the founders and the corporate?
I think Susanna mentioned it very well, but you need high-level alignment. Yeah. So you might have a mid-tier CVC of a big company that's interested, but if the top directors, if the management isn't interested, that's never going to gain the traction that's promised to the startup. So I think it's very important for that investment to be in line with the business of that corporate, and also on their agenda, I think.
And if only possible, just try to avoid the exclusivity, because having two players more or less almost on the same field, so that they see that it's not like, I can just park here and wait forever and maybe sacrifice the startup for that. It's more kind of like that, I'm just in the same line as everybody else, and like who is more committed, who is more interested, who is ready to put more resources, that's the one who gets the product first. So I think that's also like this, kind of like a healthy competition style is also very good.
Okay. Well, in that sense,
I think that's...
Yeah, please, Sana.
I think that's a very, very, very good point as well. And as I mentioned, both ABB and Siemens, and I don't think they're very used to necessarily being in the same cap table. But I think that kind of healthy dynamic where it's very clear what they want, and then also that there will be others potentially like themselves as well in the cap table, is very clear. Good to have that clear from day one.
So maybe Sana, from the founder's perspective or from the independent board member's perspective, do you see, for example, like a Northvolt and HD Green Steel, like a Silo, do you see that them to see the big corporates as a competitor or strategic partners? How do you see that? How do you recognize a big corporate?
I think it's, again, something where you set the expectations early on. In Syre, for instance, H&M has been our key partner from day one, but in order to actually achieve this whole kind of to be a real industry enabler the way Syre wants to be, we will also need to have other players like H&M, both in the cap table and as customers. And I think it's a very important discussion to have from day one and be very transparent that this is the case. And in terms of H&M, we had that discussion from day one, and it's even kind of written in our cooperation agreements that this is the way that we intend to do it. And then if it's there from day one, I've actually seen it work extremely well. But if it's a bit opaque and vague, then sometimes large corporates will tend to see you as almost part of their own organization. So the risk as a startup then is that they almost eat you up a bit. So again, clarity from day one, I think for us has been very important.
Okay, very interesting. So, all of the company you were running, and this is like a hardware ClimateTech companies. Everybody knows that the hardware is hard compared to the software companies. you need to raise a ton of money, and you need to think about how to attract it for the great talent. But what was the biggest challenge so far, or what will be your future, the biggest challenge to run the company in this climate tech field?
Yeah. If I start, I mean, I think that it's quite obvious that this is not negotiable. We need to really enable this change, the big system level change. So somebody really needs to take that responsibility. And it's not like a fad, it's not a trend. It's really, we have certain people who have taken this position to really like run this change. So that's a hard choice for any founder. So we kind of like, you need to be prepared for really going through hard times, to really raise a ton of money, to push through the gray zone, and really build the business that you know that needs to be built. So I would say that like everybody should be appreciating that there are these individuals who are actually ready for that, because many of us just, you know, like would just prefer to kind of like have a comfortable life and, you know, just not bother themselves.
Yeah.
So at the same time, I think that it's extremely motivating to be really like facilitating that change, and to see that, you know, like actually one person, one team can do so much, and it's like we can really have a like much brighter future if these things just go through. But anyways, I think that it's like the challenges are both in the concrete side, but also in the mental side. You know.
Yeah. Okay. Masa?
Yeah, I think that we make hardware. So the challenge is that hardware, and there's an upside, big upside too, but hardware is international. If somebody is buying an EV charger in Southeast Asia, they have a choice of buying something from China, Europe, or Japan. So we can compete globally, but at the same time, if somebody is buying something here, we're competing with China, we're competing with Europe. And so we have to constantly be from a product perspective, and then also hardware, you need maintenance. You need to fix it sometimes, you need upkeep. So from operation, maintenance, and product, it has to be one of the best in the world to get anywhere. And so that availability, the cost, features, everything has to be at an international level. But if we can achieve this, we can sell all over the world. So it's double-edged sword.
Okay. All right. And Sana, what was your biggest challenge you have experienced so far?
I would agree with both the previous speakers, definitely. One thing to add right now, well, obviously capital and talent is the classical few things that you need also and the customers obviously to scale a company. But one dimension that has been added in the last few years, I guess, is even more is the geopolitical aspect to many of these companies, because as you rightly point out, these are global markets, and now with subsidies coming in from so many countries, and like IRA from the US, there is obviously a risk that competition is a bit distorted, at least in the short term. So I think that's just a new challenge for our companies to navigate, that there are companies that will have grants and subsidies paid, but you will still be competing, and you need to be competitive on a price level as well.
Okay.
Maybe one thing to add on that competition is that, you know, especially in this food sector, the food is like very heavily lobbied area. So it's almost an area that is not even recognized. You know, quite often when you speak about the climate technologies, food is not even mentioned, even though this climate footprint is enormous. But it's kind of like that is already like such a long heritage of like this traditional agricultural lobbying. That is kind of like preventing these new technologies from coming to market, even if that could be actually helping the traditional agriculture. So nobody's really trying to push the traditional way of producing food out from the market, but it's really like just to kind of like help everybody to kind of like have a more sustainable food production system. So that is like super interesting to see that, you know, like what is going to happen in the next coming years, you know, because we just absolutely cannot continue the way we're currently producing the food.
Absolutely, yeah, true. Let me ask you something from the total different aspect. So when we talk about climate tech, everybody's discussing about the decarbonization of the industries and also how to prevent like a global warming. But at the same time, after Ukraine situation happens, and then there's a lot of argument about the food security and the energy security. How do you see this kind of the Ukraine situation has influenced these sectors? I mean, the food industry or energy industry in the startup level? Is there any,
Yeah, I mean, if I start in there, I mean, Ukraine really has been, for example, one of the like largest suppliers of the egg ingredient and also, well, egg is kind of divided within the shelled eggs and the processed eggs, which is the powdered and liquid egg products that are mainly used by the industry. So Ukraine is a huge producer of especially this like egg ingredient. So that clearly has changed many things. But I also have to say that it's kind of like also like a little bit controversial that especially in the EU at the moment, you know, they're banning the cages, the cage production of the eggs, and then at the same time just importing like a lot of this caged ingredient to the continent. So that's like a little bit controversial, like as always these things are. But yeah, I mean, especially in this animal protein side, so many things are happening at the same time. You know, for example, you just had the one pandemic. We just got over that, and now we have this like a really enormous avian flu that has now been there for about 3 years. Now going like more and more to mammals as well. So just to kind of like see that is putting like a big threat to the food security. And there are even more of these scenarios that, you know, like what could happen in there. So clearly this is something that we see very well that in many countries the governments are very interested in supporting this biotech way of producing food, and especially kind of like giving grants and other subsidized money for enabling that. But clearly that has changed again quite a lot.
Especially Europe has been changed dramatically. What do you think, Sana?
I think that's a very fair point. But when the war in Ukraine started, I think most of the world, but especially Europe, kind of woke up to a realization that this extreme dependency that Europe has on international supply chains and food supply chains, Asian supply chains, is just a big risk. So since then, I think there's been a big process in the EU and in Europe overall to look at kind of what supply chain dependencies do we have and which ones are we prepared to take and which ones do we actually need to work with. And batteries that I work with as well is one of those supply chains where we have a huge dependency, especially on China and Asia. And a little bit back to my previous comment on geopolitics, it is just a bit of a new world, and startups even in an early phase need to be very aware of these kind of supply chain risks and where are my suppliers based? What am I dependent on? So I also see a huge change in terms of just the consciousness of the decisions you make, where you buy your products from.
Yeah.
And Europe has a clear agenda to become more self-sufficient in food, in batteries, in some minerals as well. Yeah. And that is, I guess, for other countries like Japan to be aware, but also for us based in Europe, a huge opportunity. There's just a lot happening on an EU level and in the European countries to become more self-sufficient.
Okay, thank you. Not only
and also an opportunity for Japanese companies to come to Europe, obviously, with the knowledge that you have in some areas that we don't.
That's right. Yes. Well, great. I mean, not only to the Europe but also to the Japan. Russia was like a big supplier of the oil and gas and also the grain too, and how do you think, I mean, from the Japanese perspective?
Yeah, I mean, you have to keep in mind that Japan's an island.
Yeah.
It's an island. And we're an island in the Pacific. And when you realize that 80% and more, arguably, of our energy comes from overseas in the form of oil, gas, and coal and biomass, and it's not from somewhere close. It's coming from the other side of the world. There are multiple geopolitical risks. And what's very interesting about Japan is that going carbon neutral is equal to energy independence. Because the way Japan is planning to go carbon neutral is to increase renewables like wind and solar and so on. These are local energy sources. And so it's actually very important for Japan in the global, from a global perspective, to have that energy independence. And if you can go clean and green while doing so, there's a huge benefit. It's a no-brainer almost.
Okay, yeah, no-brainers. I 100% agree. When I live in the Finland, I met the one Finnish ministers, and he told me that Finnish independence was never happen without energy independence.
Yep.
So 100% agree. So very interesting topic. Since we are in Tokyo, this is a Sushi Tech. So I want to touch about the Japans. So maybe Sana and Maija, what do you expect from the Japan? What do you think about how to collaborate between the European company and the Japanese company? The big corporate and Japanese startup.
Yeah.
What else?
Yeah, Japan is actually the #1 user in the world of this egg ingredient. So that's really the highest user of that processed egg. So there are a lot of foods that are utilizing that ingredient. It's not that visible necessarily, but it's there in the foods. So there is a tremendous interest from the Japanese companies. And I have to say that I've been very positively surprised to see the level of interest from these companies. Just thinking about making exactly the same foods, absolutely using this drop-in replacement. You don't need to change anything in the recipes, but just thinking about that it could be possible to have this new kind of supply chain for that very well-known ingredient like egg protein. But yeah, at the same time, this is not a market that a European company could just very easily just enter by themselves. I would say that is next to impossible, for us to just kind of like come to the market and say that, okay, now we'll start sales here. It's its own ecosystem. So the meaning of right partners is extremely important in here, and having these like really functional partnerships so that for example, overcoming these regulatory hurdles. Like I was mentioning earlier, food is very much regulated, not necessarily like in a way that makes sense, but more kind of like a way that is very traditional. And it's kind of like many things are just locked years and decades ago already without knowing that is something absolutely the best way or not. So this is something that requires like joint efforts. So it requires, if we have these technologies, providing the technology in the safest possible way, and then at the same time having the best possible communication channels and the network so that we can speed up this regulatory process as much as possible. But just still conclude that Europe is exactly in the same status with this food regulation as Japan is, unfortunately. So things are like very, very heavily regulated already since decades. Basically at the moment, this is the big challenge that United States is so much faster. It's crazy how much faster it is. To say, for example, in this biotech innovation, that is the real identical egg protein, and it's made in a way that already has been used for a very long time for making enzymes and other food additives. So it's there in the foods already. It's nothing new in that. We're just combining two things that are already known, and then it becomes a new thing. But to say in the US it takes about 9 months to get approval.
Yep.
In Europe and Japan it takes years. So it takes like to say maybe 3 years or something like that. So this is just a situation and we just need to start the process as fast as possible.
Should we deliver this message to the Japanese government?
Yeah, absolutely. No, this is not something that one person could just change by themselves, but like little by little, and Onego is not going to be the last one who has an improvement to the food system. So there are others coming after us.
What about, what do you think, Sanna? What do you expect for,
I think there is a big potential for further cooperation. And just to mention how because Japan does have knowledge that we don't necessarily have in Europe as well. When we started Northvolt, for instance, one of the key contributors was a gentleman named Ano-san, who was our CTO and extremely crucial in actually building Northvolt, in that he had worked in the Japanese battery industry that was then far more developed than anything in Europe, and therefore had access to knowledge and talent in a way that we would not have had otherwise. So without him, I don't think there'd be a Northvolt in the way that we have it today. And I think that's one example of kind of, we know different things well in different regions, and we just need to find each other. And I still think there's a lot more potential to do that. So I can't really see who's in the audience today, but obviously if there are some large corporates that see some potential to work with the companies that I'm working with, that's the kind of thing that we very much welcome, to make sure that we find the global partnerships that will take us to that green future that we want to see.
Great, thanks for your positive feedback, advice. Thank you, Hannah. So Masa, I know, you're based in here, so you're running the Japanese startup in here. I believe that you strongly believe that Japan has a lot of potentiality, but what do you expect more for Japanese corporates, Japanese ecosystem player?
Yeah, a couple of simple truths, I think.
Yep.
So number one, what are we good at doing? We work a lot. We work a long time, the Japanese. We're good at staying overnight in the office. And what do? We do Kaizen, we're very good at making something better that already exists. And if you look at the economic prosperity that Japan enjoyed after the World War, it's all about making high quality manufacturing. Now, in the 90s, we went to 90 yen to the dollar. It was too expensive to make things in Japan. And so Japan, with the internet, tried to go into software. Where are we now? We haven't had any inflation in the past 20 some years.
Yeah.
In the past 2-3 years, Europe and America, other countries have inflated about 20%. Japanese yen is 156 yen again. But we're still very good at making things better and making reliable, high quality products. What else are we going to do but reinvigorate manufacturing? We should make things here again and ship them out. We're cheaper. It's so much cheaper to make things in Japan with automation and with that culture of Kaizen and just making things better, higher quality. We have to go make more dollars because our currency is cheap, and we have an aging population, and we're beginning to lose some of the really skilled engineers that helped grow Japan in the past 30 years. And so now is the time to reinvest into hardware, into value-added manufacturing, into core technologies that we can then ship globally, because we're in a really good state to do that. So that's how I feel.
That's a very interesting. This issue, the climate change, is not a local issue; it's a global issue.
Yeah.
And of course, all the Japanese corporations, all the company in the world, need to consider how to address, how to cooperate. On the other hand, for example, like Finland and Sweden, it's a very kind of small countries. Sweden is the largest country in the Scandinavians, but still like 10 million populations, and Japan has a 120 million population. It's still big. And my question is maybe Masa, that how would you advise to the founders and the startup, entrepreneurs, how to go global? Because again, in this field, this is not, the local agendas.
Yeah, no,
it should be global.
Think about it. Japan, all of these big companies that everybody is representing here today, they were startups at some point. Honda was a startup, Toyota was a startup, Sony was a startup. How did they go global? With a product. It was hardware. Hardware, unlike software, unlike a platform, unlike e-commerce, which are all things that grew Japan's startup industry for the past 20 years, those are really hard to go international. You have a language barrier, all sorts of things. If I make a really good EV charger, I can sell it in Europe. It's that simple. And it's cheaper here, and the people, the culture, we're very good at this. In the past 100+ years, since the Industrial Revolution, if you look at each region and country and kind of stick to what they're good at, Japan is manufacturing. We're good at making stuff. So I suggest to Japanese startups, okay, like AI is great, use AI, but that you don't have to compete with ChatGPT today.
Yeah.
Why don't we do something we're pretty good at? Land is super cheap outside of Tokyo. We can build a factory, you can build products. In 2-3 years, you can ship it to America. Shipping an AI product to America right now from Japan, really difficult. So why don't we go back to what we're good at, and the VCs fund some of these hardware companies again, kind of go back to our roots.
Yeah, and I think it's actually fascinating to think about that. You know, the world really is the playground. That, you know, we're having the same challenges everywhere. So it's kind of just don't think about that you're a startup from country X and then you need to go abroad. That's like a completely wrong approach. You need to think about that everybody's from somewhere, and you kind of like you build on your own strengths. You adapt the strengths that you don't yet have from elsewhere, see where are the biggest opportunities, you go there, you find the right partners. Like forming these partnerships nowadays, it's so much easier than it has ever been. So we don't need to have any consultant helping us. I just call anyone whenever I need, you know? So I think it's super fascinating to see that, you know, we are just globally solving these global challenges.
Yeah, yeah. Susanna, let me introduce one interesting data. I'm not sure if you are familiar, but the number of the listed companies, which was established 100 years ago, Sweden has the second largest. Of course, Japan has the largest. I think Finland has the third largest in terms of numbers. So Sweden has a lot of traditional companies like Scania and Volvo, a lot. But at the same time, I mean, Sweden is also like a most active startup ecosystem players in the Europe, in the world. How is that possible? I mean, you have a great traditional company, you have a great startup ecosystem, and then so that's why so many countries are hungry to run your model.
I think it's a very, very good question, but and I think it's a very complex set of answers, obviously, and then partly probably luck. But we do still have a big, a number of very big corporates that are actually Swedish founded and still based here, but very, very international. Like the H&M, Scanias, Volvos, you mentioned a few. But I think one thing is actually in terms of the ownership of them, that they've stayed Swedish for this amount of time, is that we have a system that allows shares to be a different voting class. So we have some families that still control these companies, even if they actually own quite a small share of them today. So that would be one. But then I think one advantage that we have in a way, which is maybe a bit contradictory, is that we are a small country. Because startups, when they start up, they don't think about the Swedish market normally at all. They start thinking internationally from day one. Because if you have larger ambitions, it's just so apparent that Sweden is not enough for you. So it's kind of from day one a very international focus, and then we have these large corporates in Sweden, and some of them obviously support and invest in startups. So I think that creates an ecosystem. The last thing I would point out, and again, there are a number of reasons I can't bring up now, but I would also bring up the value of role models. So we had a few entrepreneurs early on that were successful in building kind of global champions and building global and unicorns. And I think the more companies like that you see in a certain context, like in Sweden, the more other entrepreneurs believe that it can be done, and therefore it kind of becomes a virtuous cycle in looking at those role models and believing that you can build large-scale companies.
Why? Yeah. I mean, I really like this topic. I wanted to continue for another 60 minutes, but I feel a lot of pressure from the organizer to wrap up. But then maybe one final question to three of you. So after the Prime Minister Kishida in Japan declared 2 years ago, I mean, Japan will become the startup nations. And the Japanese startup ecosystem is still premature compared to Europe, compared to the US, but it's growing rapidly. And I see a lot of demand, a lot of appetite. So many young entrepreneurs, young students, great talents wanted to create some meaningful companies in this field, the climate tech field. Could you give one advice to the founders or young entrepreneurs who wanted to build a climate tech company in Japan? What would you say? One advice? Yeah, maybe.
Okay.
Masa?
Startup does not mean young person.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, let's get really experienced people building a second career, people that have comfortably run a billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar company to go make one themselves. Like, why does it have to be the student? Why can't we get super skilled people, back them with enough money to build industry for our country? Like, it feels like in Japan, startup is young guy. Like, let's not do that anymore. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but back people who are capable.
Right.
But isn't it actually so that statistically, being 45 years old when you're a founder, founding a company, statistically, that's the best possible age. So I think that's also very motivating for many people.
Yeah, that's true. Any other advice?
Yeah, I mean, I've been complaining a lot about this regulation and so on, but honestly, I mean, I do believe that, when we have money people, like financiers, we have technology people, like founders, we have builders actually solving these climate issues. I have so much more hope in that compared to the political parties and governments to only solve these things. So we are the doers. We can actually make it, and we can really have a change.
Great. Sana, any advice to the future entrepreneur?
I would like to add on to the previous point. Looking at Northvolt is run by Tesla's former head of supply chain, and H2 Green Steel is run by Scania's former CEO. So these are very seasoned individuals. So I completely agree with the previous point. I think looking at these opportunities, this is a great space to be in. Green transition is happening, and it's happening now. Look at the market internationally. Europe is a great market for these kind of companies, given that the EU has a very strong climate agenda. So I would definitely urge you to look internationally, and definitely at Europe too. And then, just to reiterate, this is the strongest mega trend and will be for many, many years to solve this green challenge. So it's definitely a space to be in.
Okay, thank you, Sana. We have covered so many topics, so many, positive, feedback as well. Unfortunately, we need to wrap up, so we need to call it today, but please give a big round of applause to the three panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much.